Hoover to FDR. So Hoover, as the president, is going to fight this economic depression, honestly, more vigorously than most other presidents had fought other depressions in American history. But Hoover's big thing is that he really believed in voluntary private relief. He felt like that was much more preferable than federal intervention. He had done things like back in 1929, he had persuaded Congress to create the Federal Farm Board. This would promote like voluntary agricultural cooperatives to help raise farm income without government like regulation. And so he had hoped that after the crash, he could apply ideas like this to other industries. So for instance, he would obtain pledges from business leaders to maintain employment levels or wage levels. But the thing is, most of these businesses are going to soon repudiate on these pledges. Still, even with that, Hoover rejects government action. He really felt like charities and local authorities, they're the ones that should be helping unemployed people. He felt like any kind of direct federal relief would, first of all, expand government power, which he did not want to do, and he felt like it would undermine the recipient's character. He is going to veto congressional attempts to aid the unemployed. Here's the thing, and here's the problem with this view. Private programs did exist, but those aiding unemployed people scarcely existed. So they were very few and far between. And in fact, very few of them had unemployment funds. And the ones that did have those kinds of funds, they're going to be soon exhausted because there's just such a large amount of people that are unemployed at this time. And so private charitable groups are going to quickly use up their resources. The other issue is that the local government, because he felt like the local government should step in before the federal government, the local government just simply couldn't cope either, especially as the Depression deepened. By 1932, many of the cities across America had no relief appropriations left at all, if they had any to begin with. So the thing is, with Hoover, his problem isn't that he first relied on charities and local government. That's not the problem. The problem is he refused to admit that that wasn't enough. We're going to see, though, the Depression is deepening, and he is going to try to adopt some more activist policies. It'd be things like he persuaded Congress to cut taxes because that would boost consumers' purchasing power, their buying power. If they're not having to pay taxes or certain taxes, then they can go out and buy more items, etc. He increased the public works budget. We get things like the RFC established. This is the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. It lent federal funds to banks and insurance companies and like the railroads. And the idea was by helping these big industries on some level, the recovery could trickle down to ordinary Americans. And this is kind of going with that trickle down economics, which we've already seen does not work. He did allow the RFC also to lend small amounts to like state and local governments for unemployment relief eventually. But Hoover's ideological limitations infuriates Americans who see him as being basically indifferent to their suffering. Which brings us to the 1932 election and one of the big things that happened right before this election. This is dealing with the so-called bonus army or bonus marchers. What happened is in 1932, unemployed veterans from World War I are going to gather in Washington. So these are the marchers, and they're going to demand the payment of their service bonuses that technically weren't due to them until 1945. That's why they're called the bonus marchers, because they're marching for their bonus. The thing is, Hoover refused to even meet with them, and Congress is going to reject their plan. So what do these marchers do? They basically set up a shanty town at the edge of Washington, D.C., and they'd camp out in any kind of vacant public building. Now, this doesn't really look good. So Hoover is going to move to have them evicted. But General Douglas MacArthur, who is the one in charge of this, is going to exceed his cautious orders, and he basically leads cavalry, infantry, tanks against the bonus marchers. Troops are going to clear buildings and assault the shantytown, dispersing veterans and their families, and even set fire to their camp. This provokes outrage. Hoover's administration is going to try to brand the bonus marchers as, oh no, they were communists, they were socialists, they were criminals. But actual investigations into this refuted all these claims. And so Hoover's really branded as, harsh and insensitive. And this is right before the 1932 election. The thing is, Republicans really had no prospect for victory come the election of 1932. And so they're basically going to renominate Hoover, and the Democrats are going to select the governor of New York, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR. He is going to promise a new deal for the American people. FDR had really prepared to be president. First of all, he was, yes, a distant cousin of Teddy Roosevelt. And then he had been born to a wealthy family back in 1882, gone on to be educated at Harvard, trained specifically in law, and then he had trained and schooled himself in politics by being first a state legislator and then assistant secretary to the Navy under Wilson. And then, of course, we see him like governor of New York. The thing is, many people I've seen up to that point, you could characterize FDR as a rich white boy. That term that we use in more modern eras. But in 1921, FDR contracts polio. And this makes a huge difference in his life because it is going to paralyze him from the waist down. For the rest of his life, he is going to be dependent on braces or crutches. And this, first of all, gives him a whole new maturity, but also adds to his compassion for other people and the plights they could go through, and gives him so much more determination. A lot of his involvement in politics really is owed to his wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, and we're going to get more into her later. During his campaign, the American people saw very little of what this New Deal could involve. Generally, he spoke in, general terms or vague terms. Really, the clues you could get were from his actions, specifically within New York. As the governor, he had created the first state system of unemployment relief there and supported social welfare and conservation. The other thing about FDR is he has this outgoing personality. He radiates warmth and hope, and that is so important during this time period. As you can see here on this map, FDR is going to carry every state south and west of Pennsylvania. However, just because FDR wins the election doesn't mean he's president yet. Hoover is still going to be president for the next 4 months. And during this time period, the Depression is getting worse. Remember, we don't hit really the bottom of the Depression until about July of 1932. What happened is we get a panic on the banking system during this time period. A lot of banks had already failed at this time. And what happens because of that is that a lot of people rushed to the bank to get their money out, but it was too late and they'd basically be robbed of their savings. The thing is, the way banks work is they don't have at any given time all of the money in the actual bank, like have the cash on hand in the actual bank of everyone who has a bank account there. Instead, your money isn't in the bank. Instead, it's actually invested in, a loan to someone for a car, or a business loan or something like that. And the idea is that the bank is going to get all of that money because it's loaned and they owe the money back. But if maybe 10 people run to the bank and get all their money out of their life savings, that's not too big of a deal. But if everyone rushes to the bank at the same time, the bank doesn't have that cash on hand, and therefore the bank ends up closing. You can see depictions of this in movies like It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart. There's a run on the bank, the savings and loan. And the original Mary Poppins also has a run on the bank. And so basically that's what happens in this time period, is people rush to the bank, and if they didn't get there fast enough, all of their life savings would just be gone. So thinking about FDR, and you might watch the next video before you really answer this question, what president do you think you could compare FDR the most to? And think about it in terms of, you can go for a more modern president, or you can go further back in the past, comparing him to a different president.